Okay, so there has been a change in members, but we will deal with that later. But I would like to start with today's lecture by Mr. Ethan Silver from the University of Edinburgh. Now, Mr. Silver is going to explain how he would prepare for this difficult motion. Okay, thank you. So, in about 20 minutes, please.
Hi everyone, I hope you're all feeling good today. So what we want to talk about then is this motion about the EU, which I think can initially be quite confusing. I don't know how much all of you know about the EU, so it might be useful if you put your hands up and tell me anything you know about, anything you've seen that's been happening in the EU lately, anything that you've read on the news, or what you think the big issues are that are affecting the EU. We can have a little brainstorm, and that might be a good way to start thinking about this motion, think about what might be important issues that come up in this motion. So has anyone got any ideas off the bat about what the issues might be with the EU? Yes? Refugees, yes. So there's been a big crisis of refugees coming into Europe and travelling through member states lately. Very good, yeah. Does anyone think of anything else that's been affecting Europe or want to add to that? Brexit, yeah. So that's the UK has voted to leave the European Union, and that's a very, very big thing because no member state has ever left the European Union before. Very good. Does anyone know why the UK decided to leave? Yep. They're afraid of terrorism. Yeah, that was one reason maybe. Yeah, they left for a lot of reasons. Can anyone think of any others? Does anyone know? Yeah?
Is it because of the refugee system and how there are open borders in the EU?
Yeah, so I think partly is a concern about refugees and maybe immigration in general. So part of the EU, the way it works is that if you're a European citizen, you have the right to go and work in any other member state. And so part of the concern for the UK was that they'd seen a lot of immigration lately from poorer countries in the EU, and that affected them quite a lot. Okay, good. So I think that's interesting because it shows that all of you really read the news and you know a lot about the EU and the issues affecting the EU, so I'm very impressed. Now, what I'm going to do then is I'm just going to talk very briefly about some of the context for the EU in how it came to exist. I think that might be useful when thinking about this motion. The other thing I'm going to do is just right now talk about the motion and what exactly it means, because I think it can be quite confusing. So I actually think there are two ways to interpret this motion. The motion is, this House believes that the EU should abandon its commitment to the principles of open borders between member states. So in a lot of the EU, they don't have any borders at all. You don't have to kind of check your passport when you go through. And so that's one way to read this motion. But I think more broadly, this is a motion about allowing people within the EU to move and live in any other part. So it's this idea that is a founding principle, free movement of labour within the EU, that says, that as a European citizen, you have that right. And that leads to a really large amount of immigration between member states. And I think the context for this is that what's happened lately is a big growth in the EU in the past in the past 20 years or so, and it's grown a lot toward the east. So you had lots of European countries that used to be communist and used to be part of the Eastern Bloc with the USSR that now have become capitalist, and so And so now they wanted to join the kind of Western European nations, but they were a bit poorer and they hadn't developed as much. And so when they joined, that meant that lots of people were interested in moving toward the Western European countries because they had jobs that paid better and better prospects. And so I think perhaps some of the context for thinking about this motion is that lots of people have decided to move in order to try and better themselves. And that's one of the main issues. But like you say, also you have a refugee crisis that's going on there, which is a big movement of people. What's going on there is you're going to have lots of people that are entering the EU, and because there aren't any border checks, they're also able to move quite freely within the EU once they get in. So that's perhaps something else that's affecting people. So just very briefly then, what really happened in terms of the purpose of the EU and its founding is that after World War II, a lot of Europe was very beat up, right? A lot of factories had been destroyed during the war, and lots of Europeans also felt that we've spent our entire history fighting each other, and that there's never a really long period of peace in Europe between all these big countries and nations. And so they decided to get together and form a community. And that community had really two different purposes. The first was to help rebuild, right? It's to help increase economic growth. And part of that is allowing people who have skills to move between different nations, so that if someone is really good at building factories, they can go from one country to another and help do that as quickly as possible. Another part of that is political, and that's this idea that we don't want to fight anymore. And one really good way to stop fighting is if we all think of ourselves as part of the same people. And so people have started to think of themselves as European, and it's the European Union that has helped do that. Because now, I'm not just a UK citizen, I'm currently also a citizen of the European Union, and that gives me like European rights as well as my UK rights, and that's where this idea of me being able to go to different countries and do what I want and form a better life for myself really comes from. So that's interesting. Okay, so now what I want to do, now that we've kind of chatted a little bit about the purpose and the founding of the EU, is think, how are we going to approach this motion? Keeping in mind what we've discussed, keeping in mind, what's been going on with immigration, where immigration tends to come from, and how this might be affecting people. So generally, in the EU, countries in the West are like the kind of richer, slightly more developed ones. So countries like the UK, countries like France or Germany are the really big economies, and that's where they're seeing more immigration that has affected them. So if any of you got any ideas about what the effect of lots of people moving into those countries might be, or how people feel about that? Yeah?
So like these nations are really major, so like they feel like they're kind of they're not profiting from like joining the EU because like they're like people are that are in this that are from the states in the EU are allowed to like live freely, so that they're not really profiting from being part of the EU.
Okay, so you say that some people might feel that they're not profiting from this increased immigration. So why do you think that all of that immigration, this is open to anyone, why do you think that immigration might not be profitable? Why might that be bad for an economy? Yes?
Because like the people who live and actually live, like is like actual like British can't work because those workers that come from those poorer countries would work with lower profit.
Yeah, very interesting. Yeah. So what you're saying is that if people come over and they're very willing to work and they're used to taking lower wages, then that might mean that everyone might get lower wages because of the supply of labour there. So. Thank you. Okay, can anyone think of a good reason, a reason why immigration might be good for the economy? Why having lots of people with various skills and education that are coming to the country really keen to work might be a benefit to those Western nations? Yeah?
It's more diversity and it's easier to connect with other countries. So people from other countries can come into your country and make connections with their own country.
Yeah, that's very interesting, thank you. And so that kind of relates to the political purpose of the European Union that we were talking about earlier, yeah? The idea that if you spend more time around people from different nations, you feel more European because you're around all those different people. So that's interesting. Does anyone think why, another reason why immigration might be good in terms of economics, why it might be good in terms of allowing business to grow? So, yeah?
Maybe the fact that there are more workers and also there are more consumers.
Okay, yeah, so there are more workers and more consumers. And if we've just said that wages are going lower, then that might make it easier to do business. It might mean that business grows more. It might also be the case that this allows for skill shortages, right? So it might be that lots of Polish people have very good educations when it comes to technical skills. And so if the UK suddenly realizes that, you know, we're really struggling in terms of getting people who are properly educated to fill the jobs and help people grow, then having so easily the supply of people that can come and work can really help businesses grow as well, yeah? So it's also skills, the skills that people take. It's interesting. So working on this diversity point, the idea that it can be really good politically for people to be around each other and to make connections, why might free movement of labour, open borders, actually be bad in terms of how people feel about being European? Can anyone think of a reason why this might have actually made people more upset with people from different nations? Anyone? Yeah?
Maybe it's the world is like, not the world, but the country's too diverse. They don't feel like they're at home.
Yeah, good. So perhaps some people might feel it's too much and that they're losing their national identity. Very good. And we've also said that that the decrease in wages might also make people upset, right? So the fact that wages are going down might make people angry at those from other nations. So one interesting thing is that when the referendum happened and we decided to leave, there were more instances of kind of racist attacks because people kind of felt it was acceptable now to take out anger on people from different nations, which is really unacceptable. But it shows that sometimes this free movement of labour has led to tensions inside. So, do people think if we ended free movement of labour, do you think that the UK would still have wanted to leave the European Union? Do you think it would have still voted to leave? No? You think not? Does anyone think they still would? Not quite sure. Okay. Good. Okay, so now maybe we'll talk about Eastern nations or newer nations to join the EU. So, can anyone think what the effect might be of lots of people leaving, like your country, to go work elsewhere? Has anyone got any ideas about that? Yep.
Labor is left from Eastern countries, Western nations, then it would be much more difficult for Eastern nations to develop economically.
Yeah, very good. So I'll just put this here. So what you're saying is if lots of skilled people leave, it becomes harder to develop your own economy. Yeah? Thank you. Has anyone got any other ideas about how this might affect the economy? Why? Do you think that... Okay, so one potential positive might be that people leave and go and work elsewhere, but sometimes they come back. And so sometimes what they do is they go and work for really big companies or, very, very skilled people, and they learn those skills and they can take those back to their home country. So maybe, you're saying, we had the idea that this is decreasing development in those countries, but maybe you could also argue it's increasing development in those countries because you're getting your population skilled and getting them to have that experience. Very good. Okay, so finally then, I just want to talk about the people themselves that are moving, so the people that choose to immigrate. So, why do you think people choose to do this? To leave their homes and to move to a completely new place? Yeah?
Because they don't have money.
Sorry? Because they don't have money. Yeah, so they're doing this to better themselves, right? To better their lives, to create a better life. So. Yep. Has anyone got anything to add to that? So do you think they're good people or bad people? Good people, yeah? So they're probably very good people we care about. And as we said, sometimes they move back and help their country develop with what they learned. And sometimes they settle in the countries where they go. And they mix, and they have that idea of being a European citizen as well. So this idea of really not just being, a British, or not just being Polish, but being a European citizen. One final thing I'll say before we get together for the debates then and work on some of the ideas that we've come up with now is that sometimes what people do is they go abroad and work, but they send some of that money back to their families back home. So that's a way that they can kind of increase the prosperity of those poorer countries by having those transfers of wealth. Okay, so. Okay. Okay, thanks. So what we're going to do now, we're going to break up into our groups, and we're all going to have different judges. So.